Parents, we looked at it early, how Proverbs 4:23 says this, above all else, guard your heart. Man, I know if you're like me, man, our kids are so precious to us and our time is precious to us. And I often tell coaches, hey, when you have someone's child and their money and their time, hey, this thing is emotional. And one of the things I've learned as a family for my wife and I is I've got to establish a feeling boundary, an emotional boundary, because when we're at those games and we're at those events and we're at those matches, is it not amazing how quickly we can get sucked in to some behavior that's not who we want to be and is not representative of who Christ is? Man, one of the most valuable things you can do is to establish a feeling boundary. And one of the things I encourage parents to do is to always think about responding versus reacting. I often see it in sporting events where, hey, something happens and one set of parents is yelling because they think it's wrong, but when the same thing happens, but it's in their favor, well, hey, they're all good with it because their reaction was unhealthy, or maybe it was even a little bit immature. I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:11. Paul says this, it's the chapter on love. We only hear it at marriages, but it's actually applicable in every area of our life. But Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 13:11. He says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put those childish ways behind me. Man, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give our children as we navigate these feelings is to put our childish ways behind us. Man, it's so easy when our heart is so invested in our children's activities and events, and even what we hope to be their success in the future, to get outside the boundary of what God has called us to do. Romans 14:20 and 21 says this, don't undo the work of God for a chunk of meat. Oftentimes in the athletic world, here's what I'll say. Man, don't undo the work of God for a bad call or a loss at a 9-year-old event. But man, stay true to who God's called you to. So as you navigate this sport journey, maybe would be healthy to simply take some time and say, hey, I know these things are what's gonna kind of cause this emotion in me. I'm gonna establish my responses. Even my wife and I will sit down and talk about some of those responses. Hey, when our kid gets hurt on the field or on the mat or on the court, here is our established response. We are going to let the coach and the trainer deal with that until they ask for our help. Hey, when a referee makes a bad call or when someone shouts something that's maybe even what we considered personal against our children, here will be our response in those moments. Because if we don't predetermine our responses, then what happens is our heart elicits a reaction. And that reaction can sometimes not only be detrimental to our relationship with our child and our community and even our family, but ultimately it can be damaging to our personal testimony and our walk with Christ. And so, hey, maybe today it would be wise to simply sit down and say, hey, how can we manage these emotions more properly by setting up some boundaries so that we do what's best, not only for our child, but for our spiritual journey as we navigate this sport world.